Welcome, those of you who have joined us so far. It looks like we're still waiting for, we'll give some more folks time to come on board. So we'll take just a couple of minutes and we'll get started here pretty soon. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Thank you all for joining us this morning as we unpack the economic impacts and retail performance of the fourth quarter sales period, the October, November, December time period, the normal holiday shopping trend. Along with the results, we'll also dive into our assumptions about the future sales tax forecast that we have. Just as a few points administratively, this is going to be a live webinar, so we will be recording it. You all should be muted during the presentations, but if you have questions, feel free to use the Q&A little icon up at the top of the screen. It's the one with the question mark in the bubble. Feel free to submit your questions there, and we'll be looking to address those at the end of the presentation. We'll have a full Q&A there. Also, the webinar and the PowerPoint presentation will be available likely at least by Monday, might be sooner, on our website, HdLcompanies.com. It'll be under the COVID-19 header, and we'll also be blasting out an email as soon as it's available on our website, so that everybody can grab it there if need be, if you want to take a look or be reminded of a few things that we pointed out. As many of you may know, I'm Bobby Young, and myself with Brett Plumley, we're both here. They're going to be talking through the webinar today and providing you the news that we have, but then also our entire team of 11 principals will be going out and meeting this quarter with you and walking through your forecasts specifically here for our California clients. It's we will take what we're talking about today and customize it down for you. At HdL, we continue to benefit from the strength of our client base, and therefore our ability to capture about 98% of the statewide data. This provides us the actual data to follow the trends, both now and from prior periods, especially prior recessionary or quote-unquote slowdown periods that we've experienced. As we go through the webinar, just a reminder that we do maintain data by industry and agency. So we look at, while we'll look at and start talking about the statewide, we'll quickly get into the details for each major industry group, as we call it, or just industry, and what the results were and what our forecast is, what we're thinking. So to date, we've experienced about a full year of the pandemic, and thankfully, we're now receiving the vaccine on a larger scale distributions, allowing many counties to begin moving into different tiers, leading to the eventual reopening of the economy. So you'll hear us reference kind of the future, because that's definitely right here amongst us to affect the change. If we can go to the next slide there. Perfect. So what you see on the screen, we've been kind of looking first statewide basis. As a reminder, all of our data is on what we call an adjusted basis. So whether it be payment anomalies or just other things that may skew the data, we show it on this adjusted basis to really track the trends more closely and see what's going on. So on the screen, what you see is for a reminder of fiscal year 1920, thereby data ending at June 30, if you will. We ended up down about 2.5% overall, and with our current to-date data, that would include and receipts for third quarter and fourth quarter now, and then including our forecast for both first quarter and second quarter to come, you can see we're forecasting fiscal year 2021 on a statewide basis to be up about almost 5% compared to the low period of 1920. Also, what you see on the screen is us kind of denoting the time period pre-COVID, which is kind of our peak, if you will, back in fiscal year 18-19. where it shows 7.2 billion overall. And when we then look at our forecast for fiscal year 2021, you can see us reaching 7.3. So back to and starting to exceed pre-COVID high points. Most notably overall, as we've talked about, and we and our team really highlighted last quarter, it was the implementation of AB 147 and how that new money from marketplace facilitators has been helping support the overall sales tax trend to lessen the impact of store closures and shelter-in-place directive that we experience so heavily in the local place of sale. There's definitely been some changes that have been going on with the consumers. We'll talk about that as we go through each one of the industry groups coming up. But as you can see on the outlook for future annual periods, you can see a stronger recovery that we see happening in fiscal year 21-22, 7.3%, really speaks to the continued greater distribution of the vaccine and the further reopening of the economy to a large extent, cooling off and getting back into more normal growth periods in the future years. The other consideration that we have been taking into account is now the most recent federal stimulus package that will not only help folks from a tax refund basis, but also rent relief. And then, as many of our California clients have experienced, added revenue or expected revenue from the federal stimulus package for your local jurisdictions, making up for what you may have lost during the COVID period. So a lot of that then will get spent and be pushed back in the economy, and that's why we see such a stronger rebound there, especially in fiscal year 21-22. Next slide, please. So continuing this comparison of pre-COVID fiscal year 18-19 as that high point, and what we're projecting now for fiscal year 2021, the bolded green, fiscal year 18-19, the kind of dashed out or feathered out green there. Bottom one is fiscal year 2021. You can see this dramatic growth out of the pools. Again, we've hit this pretty hard. You can see how much general consumer goods really related to place of sale have pulled back. And we don't anticipate that having or getting back to exceeding pre-COVID high periods. Autos and transportation have done really, really well. You'll hear us continue that story. As you can see, we're very close to where we were 18-19. And restaurants and hotels, along with general consumer goods, the pullback and the expected slow return for restaurants, not quite happening here in fiscal year 2021, and may not be for a couple more years to come. Next slide. So breaking that annual, the fiscal year down into a quarterly basis, what you see on the screen here, just kind of laying the groundwork for the slides to come. The black shaded quarters that you see up above, that's the historical performance for the last calendar year, and it correlates to the black part of our line. The next following future 6 quarters, which incorporate the rest of the current fiscal year and next fiscal year, do relate to the more recent trend coming that we expect to come on the dotted portion of the line. So speaking to a couple of those, we saw fourth quarter 20 down statewide only 1.9%. That is still better than we had anticipated last quarter, and we'll talk about some of those reasons for it. But then also, as we, this is kind of a good time to remind everybody, as we have experienced the negative impacts from COVID, we now get to benefit for the rebound, and not having a full shelter-in-place directive to where businesses are completely closed So right when we hit first quarter 21, we begin comparisons with the prior year. Here you'll see a 3.6% gain in one that we're forecasting for 1Q21 compared to prior year, which was down 0.7%. And first quarter was when we first started to see the shelter-in-place directive kick in. More dramatically with second quarter, you'll see positive 22% gain over prior year, negative 16%. So while they look very dramatic, it's going to be the reminder that we're comparing to the prior year, and how those percentages really they're going to be dramatic just because of how dramatic prior year was. Yeah, next slide there. There you go, thank you. So breaking it apart a little bit, what you see on the screen here is the green line up above is total statewide results. The place of sale, so this is the local allocations from businesses within your jurisdictions. Specifically, that's the yellowish brown line that you see there. The shaded area in between is what represents the allocations from the countywide pool. Again, included there is our increase of allocations due to AB 147. And so you can see historically a fairly consistent gap in between the two. And now and going forward, most recently and going forward, we start to see that gap widen as we do anticipate more allocations from county pool, most notably more allocations because of online shopping. Breaking apart the percentages again, you can see not as strong of a recovery expected with the local place of sale. And this is, especially restaurants take their time and need more time to recover, a longer period. Consumers will still be shopping online and working remotely. So we do see that gap continuing to trend and the rebound at a place of sale not be quite as strong to recapture back to kind of that 18-19 period pre-COVID. Next slide. Here's a slide that many of you may recall we provide at the end of each calendar year as we have been tracking this trend of brick and mortar representing local place of sale within your jurisdictions and online sales. The online portion is both from fulfillment centers that allocate to the local jurisdictions that they reside, and also pool allocations. You can see how dramatically the spread was and had been maintained for quite some time. And then here in calendar year 2020, because of the pandemic, store closures, complete drop off of brick and mortar, and then a dramatic gain. Included with that is the positive benefits of AB 147 and that new tax revenue that has just accentuated this. I know myself personally, I had conversations before that I did not anticipate that these lines would ever cross. This gap would always maintain, but they're getting close. The likelihood is we would expect in calendar year 21 for the brick and mortar to go back up, and really for online start to maybe level off a little bit compared to this dramatic single year gain that we've seen. This is a report that we'll have available to you in your quarterly packets when we talk to you for your results locally. So you'll get another crack to see it, but just a kind of a single year, very dramatic gain. Right now, we're going to be jumping into each one of the major categories and how they've trended so far. I'm going to pass over the presentation to Brett Plumley to talk about autos and transportation.
Thank you, Bobby. I appreciate that introduction. And we're now, as Bobby said, we're now going to drill down into each of the 7 major industry groups and the pool itself and look at specifically the fourth quarter performance compared to projection And Bobby mentioned we're looking at future as well as we lead into the meetings that we have with you this quarter. So starting with autos and transportation, this particular industry has done, and we've been talking about it in the individual meetings with each of you, it's done much better than what we had originally forecast. Each of the 4 quarters that have been impacted now by COVID, and including there in the fourth quarter 20, we can see that the actual performance for fourth quarter in autos and transportation was up 3.1%, and that was right on target with our forecast of 3%. And we also had a little bit of growth in the third quarter of 20. And when this initially hit, when the pandemic struck, we would not have anticipated this to recover as quickly as it has. The reasons that we've been talking about, they continue to be present during the fourth quarter of 20. Pricing continues to have a pretty significant impact on the sales tax associated with this industry group. And the average price of a new vehicle has gone up. It went up in the first quarter and exceeded the highest average price that we've ever seen, and that has continued through the 4 quarters of the pandemic. So new car average pricing up 6% all of calendar year 2020, and used cars as well have been up 14%. So that's had an upward pressure on the sales tax associated here and helped to offset some of the losses that we originally anticipated. And we've also have experienced, and consumers have experienced, low interest rates on new auto loans. That's had a positive impact. We've had the federal stimulus dollars that have initially helped, and a couple of different times when it's been offered by the federal government, that's helped to offset some of the income losses. That's been a positive factor here. We also, early on, there were dealers offered incentives, and toward the end of that first quarter of 20 and on into that second quarter, the big impact, and Bobby talked about it, big impact of COVID was second quarter of 20, where consumers were shut in primarily. We had that shelter in place all the way through the end of May. And that naturally now we're seeing a significant rebound in the second quarter of 21 as a result of that. Along with Bobby talked about, we're anticipating the downturn in the economy to pick back up middle of 2021. So that has helped each of the major industry groups and helped autos and transportation. And we also have had a real positive focus on a recreation type theme. So those that haven't lost their jobs and have had more discretionary income, and especially during that second quarter 20 when they were shut in, services were not being offered. They were necessarily shut down, and so consumers shifted over to purchase items, and both online, as Bobby talked about, that significant growth relating from AB 147 and from the spike that we've seen online from people being at home, but also purchasing new vehicles, used vehicles, and that has positively impacted other major industry groups that we're going to talk about as we go through this presentation. But the one-time purchases, recreational vehicles and boats and motorcycles, fun type purchases have been made, and that's really helped to offset the losses and help this industry recover much more quickly than what we originally anticipated, which is good news. Autos and transportation, as we go through, we have the 7 major industry groups in the pool, and this particular industry is the 3rd largest in our entire of the 7 major industry groups, and 8 groups when you include the pool. Autos and transportation is the 3rd largest. So we just want to, as we go through this, put this in perspective. When we're doing our forecast for you, if those cities that have and agencies that have more of a presence in autos and transportation, it is a very significant percentage-wise state throughout the state, 3rd largest group. So definitely material impact on your sales tax, especially for those with heavily weighted in autos and transportation. So we can go to the next slide, and we talk about, I mentioned this, and we have it listed here, haves and have-nots, or hotter type of purchases and cooler type purchases that we've been surprised throughout the pandemic. And you can see on that left side, the luxury brand vehicles, new vehicles. People have made these taken the discretionary income and put it into new vehicles, recreational vehicles, pickup trucks and boats and motorcycles. Fun type of purchases have been made, and much more than what we had thought, and that's really helped to offset the losses and help this recovery of this industry much faster. On the right side there, the have-nots are the sedans, more fuel efficient vehicles. Consumers during the pandemic in the car market just have not cared as much about that as typically non-pandemic quarters. And so that's why we have that on the right side, and cooler purchases. We're going to start seeing that pick up as we get through the pandemic and as the vaccine kicks in and starts to draw the curve back down of the viruses, and that coinciding with the middle of this calendar year and the pickup of the economy. We'll see more normal purchases begin to take place, but that left side of that particular chart has really helped during the pandemic and helped recovery of this industry much sooner. So we are anticipating, and Bobby talked about that fiscal year 18-19 being the benchmark year when cash was at a peak level. It was pre-pandemic, and we did not foresee a recession in the near-term horizon. And we are comparing that as a result in all of the major industry groups, 18-19. When does this industry group get back from a cash perspective to that same level? And autos and transportation at this point is now fiscal year 21-22, we get back to that level. And that has improved over the pandemic. So we were at 22-23 and 22. And as we go, Bobby talked about, we were forecasting out into the future. So as we move out, we are seeing stability of this industry group all the way out to fiscal year 25-26, and we have 2.5% annual growth built into the forecast statewide, and then we fine tune it to your individual agencies as we do with the forecast in every of the major industry groups and the pool itself. If we go to the next. Now here we're going to talk about building and construction. And this particular industry, along with food and drugs, which Bobby will talk about in a moment, are the two industries that have recovered the quickest during COVID. And when we talk about recovery, once again, that fiscal year 18-19 level, building and construction industry actually got back to that level in fiscal year 19-20. So when we initially did our forecast, when the pandemic first struck, and we were anticipating a much more dire picture than what has actually happened, we were hearing from the city of LA talking about shutting down projects, shutting down the industry altogether. That was going to impact one of the biggest regions in the state, Los Angeles County. And we definitely look at this industry as we do all the other industry groups on a regional basis. It just didn't happen. It didn't happen in Los Angeles County. It didn't happen for the most part through most of the regions throughout the state. And as a result, it has recovered much more quickly. The permits that were on file, the builders were allowed to continue to process those, and new permits that came into the hopper as well, that helped to offset the losses early on. So all the way, we've had positive increases, positive performance. Third quarter of 20, you can see that 6.9% growth. And then the fourth quarter that we're talking about here, and that we'll be meeting with you this quarter, actual performance in the industry was 10.3%. And that we had projected a 2.5% growth. So even better than our forecast, and a really significant growth for the quarter. When we look at some of the reasons, and anecdotally, Home Depot is talking about 62% of their consumers took on at least one home improvement project in the fourth quarter, and that was up 13%. So when we talk about insulation type businesses, and we develop your forecast when we're meeting with you, and those somewhat surprising positive performances in other major industry groups, we've had the do-it-yourself type projects in this particular industry that have really helped offset losses and helped improve the performance of the industry itself. So retail foot traffic, we are expecting that to continue boosting sales in this segment. but it will slow down as restrictions are eased and spending is redirected to other areas. We get questions from you, all of you, about material prices and lumber prices and where we see that going, and material prices are definitely up significantly, and we are forecasting that to stay for a while, and actually additional price increases are coming. So that's going to continue having upward pressure on the sales tax associated with this industry group. Suburbs are expected to see strong demand for new housing sales, and remote work that COVID has brought about with all of you and with us and the businesses, that is only expected to accelerate this trend in the housing. Mortgage rates, the interest rates have been very low historically at historically low rates. Now they're creeping back up a little bit, but they're still very low, and that has been a positive on the new housing and existing housing and refinancing and construction in this industry. And I mentioned recovery in the industry happened actually in 1920. We will continue to forecast this on a regional basis. And when we talk about the size of the industry, as I talked about, autos and construction is the third largest of our 8 groups. Building and construction is the 6th largest group based on our fiscal year 2021 forecast. And we'll continue to forecast this and fine tune it based on what's happening in your particular region and your agency. And now I'm going to hand it back to Bobby to go over business and industry.
Great, thanks, Brett. So B&I is a category, an extremely diverse category that incorporates, as you see some of the bullet points there, office and equipment and materials, garden, agricultural, farm, medical and biotech, and also fulfillment centers that allocate to the local place of sale. It is incorporated here, or we incorporate it within business and industry, because recall those that allocate on a county-wide or to the county pools, we have that over in the pool section. So as we go through, just a reminder, the black shading up above relative to the black portion of the line, and then also our future forecast. As you'll see, as the pandemic set in, a lot of decreases on the business and office categories because of remote work environments being created and not as much expenditures happening. So what we saw in fourth quarter overall for B&I was a 6.1% gain, definitely bolstered by the fulfillment center allocations and online purchasing that happened during the normal holiday shopping period, helped really drive this category up. Also, more surprisingly, or with good weather, thereby not bad weather in the fourth quarter, we saw garden, agricultural, and farm equipment really continue to go on to increase and support the growth. It is, this quarter, as a reminder, is also a harvest type period before the winter sets in. It's also a period where the farming industry starts to get ready for next year, replacing equipment and getting things ready to go. So we definitely saw some gains on that front. Also, on the third bullet point there on the left, future investment in automation. As we've seen the warehouses, distribution centers, fulfillment centers continue to grow, they will need equipment to handle all of that merchandise coming and going, and thereby buying that, funneling that back through as use tax comes to each local jurisdiction into this business and industry category. So that is another piece that we continue to expect to see growing. And so the future forecast here on business and industry is a lot of positive news, most notably because we do not see that change in online buying, thereby fulfillment center allocations. And then also as the economy reopens and we return to places of work, we may see a reinvestment, maybe even tenant improvements for downsizing, which will cause Still sales tax to possibly be generated, new workspaces, even social distancing, or creating some space, some additional space where available, may cause purchases to happen in excess of what was going on second quarter, third quarter of 2020, like you see up above. So a lot more positives that we see coming here within the business and industry category. And I think also as we think about cities spending some of the money, the federal stimulus money that you received, possibly into infrastructure, possibly into office equipment, and setting up new standards. So again, the federal stimulus money may end up helping this industry just as much as we expected on the general consumer goods side, and pool allocations by way of online purchases. So a final visual, next slide, for fulfillment centers and kind of that local allocation. We'll expand the discussion with pools as part of the pools, and as we wrap up, because it is a continuing trend, and it is something that'll get extreme visibility probably within the next year or so. But the trend of having these large distribution centers localized with a sales desk, so a warehouse / distribution where goods come and go. But when you combine in the sales desk piece of it, it becomes a fulfillment center and a place where local allocations are made. We've seen this growth here continue and then just kind of blow up, if you will, in 2020, most notably because of the pandemic and online purchases. We will not neglect the fact that some of the fulfillment centers that do allocate locally have also made arrangements with those local jurisdictions for tax sharing. The net, if you will, this is the gross amount allocated to the local jurisdictions. This is all that we care about with regards to the statewide data. What local jurisdictions do with their money and how they share it is excluded from this. So but we don't lose sight of the fact that it's happening and continues to happen, where the localization of sales tax continues at a place of sale. So just dramatic growth, 250% over the last 6 years that you see here on the screen, and a trend, again, that we don't see falling off anytime soon. Next slide. Food and drugs, one of our smallest categories overall, as Brett kind of made reference to how big autos, transportation, building, construction are to the statewide data. Food and drugs, very small. No real fall off here that we've seen, and nor do we expect it to really fall back as we go forward. We do anticipate, as you see the yellow section, especially 1Q, 2Q, 3Q, to be about 1% growth. Has more to do with the cost of goods, and the second bullet point that you see there on the left-hand side, the cannabis industry continuing to expand into new jurisdictions, thereby creating new tax revenue. So that has more to do with kind of our expectation that we just won't see the dramatic gains like we saw there to the left of at the top for 1Q, 2Q, and 3Q through the pandemic. Just get back into something more quote unquote normalized. But if we go to the next slide, we're really focused here on cannabis because of how much it's expanded during the pandemic. Funny enough, as we've kind of looked at historical data, if you flash back during the Great Recession, it really was liquor stores and grocery stores that did not fall off very much. At that time, even though there wasn't a pandemic and us sheltered in place, people just didn't have money to spend, but did still buy liquor. Here, we've definitely seen it during the pandemic. Liquor stores and now cannabis sales continue to expand. This is further accentuated by the legalization of cannabis retail sales, and also more jurisdictions allowing for the availability and sale of cannabis. So that adds, again, new tax revenue into the overall pot. One thing that we don't lose sight of is, yes, this feels like a bit of a boom during the shelter in place and maybe folks not having anything to do or as much to do recreationally, that it's a category that, or it's a sector that could also be mitigated for your local jurisdictions. Those of you that have allowed cannabis and have experienced the growth of revenues, be cautioned that and kind of your eyes open around you to see of other local jurisdictions beginning to allow for retail sales to maybe start to balance out the overall growth is what we would expect, is just not to have as much new revenue come in since these initial first waves of calendar year 2019 and calendar year 2020. But pretty fascinating when we look at kind of little micro sectors within the economy and what's doing really well. The other quick point here, much like gas and fuel sales, where we have the excise tax, the sales tax for cannabis is calculated including the state's 15% excise tax. So a little bit of tax on tax. Again, it's very similar to what we see happen with fuel sales to us as consumers, both the state and federal excise tax portions there. So that does also help accentuate the dramatic growth that we've seen. I'll hand it back at this point to Brett to talk about fuel and service stations.
Thank you, Bobby. And fuel and service stations, along with the next one that I'll talk about, restaurants and hotels, are the two industries that have been hit the hardest, just hammered during all 4 quarters of COVID. And we have, you can see it there on the screen with fuel and service stations, really negative actual performance for all 4 first quarter, second quarter, third quarter, fourth quarter of 20. And especially in that second quarter of 20 with almost 46% drop, but we have continued on with a 31% drop in the third quarter, and now the fourth quarter that we're talking about had an actual performance 32%, and that was very comparable with our forecast of a 30% drop. And it's been a combination of all negative factors. We've seen the prices at the pump have been significantly lower than they were a year earlier when you compare each of the quarters during the pandemic. And at the same time, because of the pandemic and shelter in place and lack of travel and entertainment and people staying home, especially in that second quarter with shelter in place, consumption and demand have been way down. And that's also pushed the sales tax associated with fuel and service stations down. Jet fuel, because of the lack of airline travel, that is included in this particular industry group, and that's another pushword down. So we still are projecting a negative forecast in the next quarter, first quarter 21. We've modified that a little bit, made it a little bit better, 5% better in first quarter 21 and second quarter of 21. We've taken that from a 70% to a 75%. And that second quarter, again, when we talk about most of the major industry groups, a combination of the rebound, when you compare it to that really hard hit COVID second quarter of 20, and then coming out of the downturn in the economy, that's what's factored into that 75% growth. But we've moved it from 70 to 75% because we're now seeing in California, we are having positive pressure. So prices are back up at the pump in many areas, especially in Southern California. Regular price of a gallon of gas is exceeding $4 in some cases. And demand and consumption are back up. We're reading about an upward push in demand once again as the consumers are becoming more confident about the vaccines kicking in and the coronavirus starting to stabilize. And airline travel, we're reading about individual airline agencies where their sales are back up, almost comparable to that first quarter of 20 prior to COVID hitting, which is pretty amazing. So we're seeing upward push in this industry, and that's why we bumped the forecast up in the next 2 quarters. We talk about it during our individual meetings with you. This is an ever-changing industry. We'll continue to monitor this and fine-tune it, especially we fine-tune it within your particular agency. And if there's something happen in the overall global economy or state economy that's going to materially impact this, then we can refine this as we move forward. We have seen recently shutdowns in refineries in Texas, which is a key refinery area for impacting the oil barrel prices and the prices in California and throughout the country. So we had a shutdown in Texas. We've seen some disruption in the Middle East, restricting supply. And once again, that's an upward pressure on the prices. And eventually, with demand picking back up, it's an upward pressure on, and fortunately, sales tax associated. And I mentioned travel. Travel, we are expecting to come back as the vaccines continue to get distributed. And we'll just continue to monitor things that are happening in this particular industry. When we talk about the size, Bobby talked about it, I've talked about it, the size of this particular industry group. So 8 groups, including the pools, and fuel and service stations is actually the second smallest. So it's the 7th largest group. Food and drugs is the smallest, and that moves the needle the least amount. And then the next smallest group is fuel and service stations. So it does have a more material impact on your agencies that have much more of a presence in refinery and jet fuel, and we continue to fine tune it on a regular basis based on what's happening in your particular agency. And with that, we will go to the next one and talk about restaurants and hotels. So I mentioned the 2 industries hit the hardest. Restaurants and hotels have been really hit hard, and you can see all 4 quarters of 20 significantly down, including 4th quarter that we're talking about. We had forecast a 35% drop in the 4th quarter, and the actual was 33.2%, real close to our forecast, and very much of an additional negative quarter in the state. And that's our state average decrease when we're talking about that 33.2% drop. And it's been in the individual business types, primarily with sit-down dining. So casual dining, fine dining, fast casual dining, all of those have been hit really hard. And 4th quarter 20, in many respects, mirrored the 3rd quarter 20. So we have not quite yet seen recovery beginning to happen, at least in the 4th quarter of 20. The second shelter in place that happened toward the end of the calendar year was not as devastating to restaurants as that first one that happened in that 2nd quarter of 20, because the industry and customers were accustomed to the restrictions. So you've had the shelter in place that happened in the 2nd quarter with everything being shut down, and throughout different regions of the state, as we've gone from different red level to purple level, we have had restrictions from the most significant restrictions in that 2nd quarter where restaurants were closed completely, to then allowing outdoor dining, and then allowing limited capacity to sit down restaurants and beginning to open those back up. And that is now beginning to happen. We're seeing it again with limited capacity in sit down restaurants, and outdoor dining is back once again. So we are projecting coming out of this, slowly coming out of this particular hit from COVID. And as you can see in the forecast, when we look at 1st quarter, 2nd quarter, and 3rd quarter, 1st quarter, we're still projecting a drop, negative, when we compare it to that 1st quarter of 20. 1st quarter of 20, remember, was just about 1/6 of that quarter was hit. So we're in the 1st quarter, not quite coming out of it. And then 2nd quarter of 21, once again, that rebound that we talk about, 61% is projected statewide when we look at an increase in that 2nd quarter and coming back out. Hotel occupancy, it's important to mention because it has a real significant impact on this industry group. And it's hovered around the 50% mark now. I mean, that was much lower when COVID first struck. and significantly, especially your cities and agencies with tourism, you know that you've been hit so hard by the lack of tourism resulting from COVID. But the occupancy level that is anticipated to help hotels break even is at that 50% mark, and that's where fourth quarter, that's about where they're hovering. And visitor spending in California for all of calendar year 2020 was down 59%. So as we get through the COVID and as the economy starts to pick back up, the tourism, we're anticipating tourism industry will start to pick back up, and that's going to help entertainment related businesses and will help the restaurants get back closer to recovery. Prices, looking ahead at this point, prices are going up, and that's a positive impact on sales tax associated in this industry group. And as the reopening continues, we expect that there is and has been some pent-up demand for dining out. You can kind of just feel that people want to get back out and have wanted to get back out during the whole 4 quarters of the pandemic, and there seems to be light at the end of the tunnel right now. So that is happening slowly, and we anticipate that's going to continue to grow. Travel is slowly coming back up. Occupancy levels, they are creeping back up, but they're not expected to fully recover until 2023. And when we look at the tourism industry, visitor spending is expected to grow to $88.5 billion in this calendar year. That's a 50% growth, which is really significant, really positive, but it's still, just keeping in mind, it's still far below calendar year 2019, and the spending level in that calendar year was 145 billion. So when we talk about 50% growth just to get back up to 88.5 billion, that's just a little more than 50% of where this industry was in calendar year 2019. So really going to take a significant amount of time to get back to full recovery in that fiscal year 18-19 benchmark year. And then just if we can go to the next slide, wanted to quickly mention the restaurants and bouncing back. And there's been a $28 billion American Rescue Plan, and that's intended to assist restaurants, food trucks, bars, and street vendors in paying back their rent, mortgages, and pretty much anything else, and not a lot of restrictions placed. Over $5 billion will be set aside for smaller venues whose annual gross receipts were below 500,000, and that leaves almost $24 billion for everyone else. Grants will be capped at $10 million for restaurant groups and $5 million for individual venues. And the grant amount is determined by subtracting 2020 sales from 2019 revenue. So a gap type of funding that's available, which is positive for this industry. And with that, I will turn it back over to Bobby to talk about general consumer goods.
Great. Thank you, Brett. So 2 biggies coming up, general consumer goods and pools. Starting with general consumer goods, much like you saw with restaurants, and right at the top, those percentage changes, both what we experienced the last 4 quarters and our future forecast, very dramatic because of how impactful the pandemic was, the shelter in place, and foot traffic overall for our local stores. When you look at the trend line itself, similar to restaurants, not anticipating a very strong boosting return as we reopen the economy. A few things to kind of keep in mind there. One, I already mentioned foot traffic, and there will be a desire, much like restaurants, of pent-up demand, people wanting to get back out, having been inside and feeling more comfortable being outside with other people in different proximities. But will they actually spend their money like they have been? And then because of the trend that we know is going to continue, which is the convenience simply of buying online and having goods shipped to you, being able to compare pricing, and everything that we were talking about before the pandemic is really only accentuated that conversation. And it's playing out right before us that we don't anticipate general consumer goods overall to really get back. It's going to be a long, slow recovery. Hopefully, at some point within the next few years, getting back to pre-pandemic high points, but maybe not overall, just given the growth factor that we've seen from shopping online and habits fundamentally changing going forward. The other point of reference, we know also that the federal stimulus package, $1,400 checks being sent out, dropping into the laps. It's really what makes us feel maybe a little bit more comforted and supported in 1Q and 2Q especially, but then also as we look to fourth quarter 2021, hoping to get back up with stores reopened and that normal holiday shopping period. Getting some growth there. So as we normally do, your local jurisdiction will be kind of crafting that for what we see for you. But if you look at the next slide, the thing to keep in mind there is your sales tax demographic. What types of stores do you have? Here you'll see compared calendar year over is this fourth quarter? I think this is just fourth quarter over prior year fourth quarter. So the holiday shopping comparison. Discount department stores within here we include Sam's Club, Walmart, Costco, Target, kind of all of the big box stores. You can see how well collectively they've all done, not fallen off as much compared to calendar year 2019 or fourth quarter 2019, but it's really been family apparel, electronic appliance stores, and department stores right there middle of the road that have been heavily impacted. Mall closures, and also the convenience of buying online, even from family apparel and maybe less costly clothing. People have not been working, and thereby, I think Brett and I joke about it of how infrequent it's been that we've actually worn soup coats, but the need to continue to buy clothing just has really fallen off, and that too may hinder a full recovery and take time to rebound because of the pandemic and remote work environment. Past general consumer goods is the discussion on the pools, and the next slide there. So as we've been talking about all along, the pools greatly benefited because of AB 147. You can see that started there first quarter 2020, high double-digit gains year over year, and the dramatic growth that we've seen out of the line overall going up. And then as you glance at our future forecast, you can see not much more dramatic growth because, again, we'll be comparing to the other side. Stores starting to reopen, folks spending their money maybe on restaurants and experiences, especially as the entertainment facilities start to reopen and people start spending their money elsewhere. But we do see a continual steady increase coming. Cost of goods or inflation factor on the cost of goods will play into that. One of the things that this does not, well, I'll talk about it. Let me see. Yeah, I'll talk about it here. Is we are anticipating some type of change specifically from Amazon. There have been discussions between Amazon and CDTFA regarding their allocations. We still don't know anything with regards to a change. So right now our forecast is still built around the assumption of Amazon allocating to the pools. Specifically for every client, what we are prepared to do and will be doing this quarter for you is talking specifically about some assumptions that we have, that how your agency might be impacted if a change happens. The major layering point here is that it is still a confidential conversation. Amazon is a single taxpayer. We cannot broadcast outside of to discuss Amazon as a taxpayer to anybody if a change does happen. And so we should be reminded it's going to be a continual sensitive conversation, and we'll look to have that conversation with you, our clients, this quarter to talk about and work it into your forecast overall. So kind of laying that out there, that just as a kind of a forepoint, look for the conversation, for us to have the conversation with you within the body of our meetings. Next slide. So how have the pools changed? Going all the way back, kind of pre-AB 147 and Marketplace Facilitator, how has spending within the pools changed? Here you'll see that general consumer goods have grown dramatically during that time period, where business and industry has then tapered off. Some of that is just on a percentage comparison standpoint, because general consumer goods have grown so much. And then also you layer in the pandemic, where businesses not buying quite as much and thereby allocating into the pools for dollar amounts in with regards to use tax and equipment purchases for dollar impacts less than $500,000. It just kind of shows how we see spending continuing to change, and this might also, as we continue to watch this type of trend happen going forward, how might consumer shopping habits continue to support these percentage changes, just as a data point, if you will. Then the last slide that we have before the Q&A session is regional results may vary. This speaks, as we've mentioned all along, sales tax in general is very regionally biased. It's dependent upon how your industry is doing or your city is doing locally, but here most especially on the pools. And where you see the dramatic gains, where we have other Southern California counties that include San Bernardino and Riverside counties. And then if you kind of go across the bottom there, you'll see Sacramento region. The other Inland Empire agencies, I think there are the 48%, so dramatically. And then also San Joaquin Valley down at the very end. This has been accentuated because of the localization of online sales desks that I talked about during business and industry category. We've seen revenue come out of the pools in 2 local jurisdictions, which then also increases their share of county pool and starts to move things around a little bit within the local jurisdiction's share of the county pool. And then you can see the Bay Area there on the far left being not quite as much growth because it ends up in other places. One, shoppers are ending up in other places, especially like the Sacramento region outside of the Bay Area, people not commuting into the Bay Area, buying things online, having it shipped to their house. So it's definitely a constant moving picture. One of the questions that we got asked in the Q&A is that specifically, do we foresee other local entities entering into agreements similar to San Jose with eBay and San Bruno with Walmart? A lot of, as we've analyzed kind of this localization, place of sale, all of the big ones seem to have been kind of checked off, if you will. It really is the conversation that we're looking forward to having with CDTFA and finding out of any changes possibly from Amazon. That's probably the last of the big movement. And there will be, no doubt, there will be companies that continue to look to gain from the localization of their sales tax by way of tax sharing agreements. So there's a bit of an incentive there. And it is a part of, and should be a part of, the bigger conversation about possibly changes that that some folks feel need to happen, of how to really make it, as some will feel, more equitable. We at HdL represent a lot of the clients statewide. We try to just see the landscape for what it is, not take a side either way, but just make sure that we're informed and can reach out to both sides to talk about what a change might mean. So no, we don't. Those local sharing agreements likely and localization of place of sale taxes will probably continue, but probably not to the extent where that we've seen historically up until this point. And that is the end of the presentation as we have it. We have Q&A that again we're hoping that you put into the feature there. Let's go through a couple that came in earlier. Brett, let's see. There you go. On lumber, so Rich Lee had a question relative to the increase in the cost of lumber and metal. Is that largely from tariffs, and can we expect that to shift with the Biden administration? You want to take that, or you want me to take that one?
I think that would be a political decision happening, but we are projecting in our forecast anyway a continued increase in lumber and materials related to the construction industry. So, that's where we are at this point in our overall forecast.
And on the other one, I think I saw you probably provide a response. Is I hear there's a dire computer chip storage shortage. Is this going to impact your forecasts?
Yeah, and it's a good question. We have been reading about that. It's something that we're watching closely. We don't, in our forecast at this time, foresee it having a huge impact on tax receipts. Our weekly numbers that we're tracking from a major Southern California auto dealer, it doesn't not seem to reflect any kind of a decrease in sales at this point in time, but we're monitoring that, and it's a very good question.
Great. I'm going to go ahead and publish a response that you had, if others want to see it, regarding electric vehicles and the possible kind of shift there of either sales tax or what it might do overall to the economy. Is the restaurant funding from the rescue plan $28 billion for California, or is that nationwide? I believe that is just, I believe that's nationwide, $28 billion nationwide for restaurants.
Yes, that's my understanding too.
Okay. Very good, and I think that's about it as far as the Q&A.
Yeah, we had a couple of questions. Is this being recorded? Yes, it is. Are we going to post the presentation? And the sooner the better. So I know we're working toward posting it. Bobby mentioned Monday at the latest is our goal right now, if not sooner than that.
Yeah. One of the other, I think, points that somebody had, the deferral program, and the governor did have a second executive order at the very end of December with the stay-at-home order that it would allow businesses to make deferrals from fourth quarter up to 90 days, which we would then expect that revenue to come in the first quarter. And then also continuing through the first quarter filing period where those revenues would be expected to be received as a part of the second quarter. Overall, for what we saw out of the first quarter missing, we did see an increase. So as we've discussed with you guys, we've got a report to show what's missing. We, as far as the forecast go, will anticipate that to come in as a part of 1Q. And overall, we really don't see the participation within that similar to the first executive order. So much lesser overall cash flow impact. And then when we think about sales tax on a fiscal year basis, we do anticipate that Even first quarter coming in as part of the second quarter, that'll still be received as a part of the 2021 fiscal year, and thereby no definitive or material impact to your forecast overall from the second and probably the final deferral act. So hopefully that answers that point for you. I think we're done, right, Brett?
Yeah, I think that's it. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you all so much for attending and spending some your morning with us. Hopefully this has been extremely helpful for you. Just to give perspective, we know a lot of you guys are working on your forecast right now, getting ready for and you're right in the middle of the budget cycle. Please feel free to take some of these data points, some of the talking points, integrate them into your conversations as needed. And then as a reminder, we'll be meeting with you later throughout the rest of March and very heavily during the month of April for your specific fourth quarter results and an update to your forecast. So hopefully before you reach your final budget preparation and documentation process, we'll be able to have that for you, the most recent numbers that we have available to help you there. And hope everybody is healthy and on their path to either getting the vaccine or staying away from this pandemic as much as possible. So hope you have a great rest of the day. We look forward to talking to you very soon. Thanks so much.